Welcome everybody to Mac Infrastructure in the Cloud for Testing, Automation, and DevOps. I'm going to pause here for a brief moment so you can review our forward-looking statement. It will also be available for a detailed review if you'd like under our resources. My name is Chris Chapman. I'm the SVP of Software Development at MacStadium. And today I'd love to tell you about what MacStadium is and how I think we can provide some useful service and some things that we do with Jamf and that we think you can do with us with Jamf. So why is Mac different in the enterprise? That's the question we all address here at Jamf Nation at a variety of levels. But it's because Apple makes developers and users build different, use different, run different. And things that run on Apple have to run on the authentic hardware in an authentic way. You can't necessarily get those types of machines at your normal AWS, Azure, or GCP stop if you're going cloud. And then in a local environment, obviously it's very different from your normal on-prem rack of equipment or your on-prem deployment to the field. Mac hardware is designed and built for the consumer, not the data center. So when you're deploying it in the enterprise, you're dealing with challenges that folks that use enterprise class and business hardware on the Wintel, Linux, other side of the world don't necessarily face on a day-to-day basis. And that's everything from how the machines behave at the hardware level to how the software interacts to how they scale and work when you're actually trying to deal with the concerns of a full-fledged enterprise. Mac servers are difficult to scale in-house. I don't know in this audience how many of you are more tuned into dealing with Macs on the desktop versus having to do Macs in something like a dev build team or having to use Macs for some control systems depending on the software you're running. But either way you slice it, when you start to try to scale it in-house physically, it comes with a litany of challenges. And luckily there's tools like Jamf that make that a whole lot better and a whole lot easier. But even with those things, we're all learning a lot from each other with these tools and these technologies every day. As Apple changes, so do we. And it makes life interesting and fun. So experimenting with these physical deployments is obviously very time consuming. You can break a machine pretty easy, you can roll it back and fix it, but nonetheless, it often takes a lot of trial and error to get things right. So what we've noticed in the world, whether it's the development lab or whether it's your team that's actually working on managing the infrastructure, somebody's got a lab somewhere or somebody's got hardware somewhere, and when it comes to the Mac side of the house, it ends up being more of a DevOps than a DevOps. And here's some typical examples of what you tend to see running around the office. It can be somewhat sophisticated, like the rack on the bottom right, or it can be a complete hodgepodge of cables and tangled networks like you see on the left. Varying levels of sophistication, but any way you slice it, it's not a simple, elegant, clean rack like you're used to seeing everywhere else. So that kind of brings me to what MacStadium decided to do in the world. We decided, why does it have to be that way? We want to make it easier for admins, for Mac and iOS developers, and for DevOps teams to have the same capabilities and scalability that other folks get with Azure or Amazon or other networks. So we decided to build that capability with Mac hardware, which again comes with its own challenges. So we're taking that consumer grade hardware, we're putting in customized racks and fittings and solutions and enterprise grade equipment around it to make it become truly like a lights out data center enterprise scaled cloud. And so what this allows you to do is help the teams focus on the work they're doing, not on all the litany of problems that come with managing this hardware. Obviously with Jamf tools and with Jamf technology, you are managing the hardware and you're dealing with the problems of the end user, but you want to focus on scalability and policy and app deployment and things like that, not bricking a machine in a lab, and especially in this day and age where the lab might be a little more challenging to get to depending on where you live. This is a way to create a cloud that is orchestratable and scalable and highly controlled and has magic hands-on remote for if anything goes wrong. So how do we do this? We build private infrastructure on the dedicated Apple hardware. So that's an important note. We're not building Hackintosh farms, and we're not using some kind of customized hardware solution where we're taking things apart. We're using legitimate Apple hardware as Apple intends it to be used, and we're deploying it in a simple and very scalable way. We basically put you behind a network firewall in a dedicated environment where you have access and control over the systems. They can be as simple as a single mini, and they can go all the way up to something that has storage and virtualization and containerization and a lot of technology around it to make it a very complex cloud. So it kind of depends on your needs and your services, but it has a full scale offering, which includes 24/7 access to support teams that can actually manage and access the tools for you. Geographic diversity, so we're in Europe as well as the US, East and West Coast, so you have some availability depending on where you live. And we have world-class security, again, ISO SOC 1 and 2, we're top-notch lights-out security, so it's a very, very secure environment. There's a lot of different ways people tend to use MacStadiums. Like I said, we have a litany of customers that range from anybody kind of experimenting in their garage with a single Mac Mini all the way up to enterprise class companies who develop the very software that everybody runs and uses every day on all their devices. And because of that, you get a wide scale and swath of the ways you could possibly use MacStadium. We provide infrastructure on demand, obviously, but it can be physical, virtual, it can have different OSs. You have the capability of imaging it in different ways and creating custom imaging. You can revert and save your state. You can create virtual networks, so there's multiple networks of capacity to deal with. It's easy to have multiple environments of different types of things, and you can manage that configuration and system while letting the hardware concerns be taken care of at the data center. So, a lot of our customers do come from the DevOps and developer background because they typically are the ones that are consuming the capacity. And here's a couple of, use cases from our customers that really kind of illustrate the differing ways that MacStadium becomes important to them and why it was important to them. For example, Homebrew, which is a package deployment tool. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with it. It's a very easy way to manage packages in developer land on Mac hardware. They actually adopted the Orca solution at MacStadium, which I'll talk about shortly, to rapidly scale their build environment and basically use MacStadium in almost an Amazon-esque way for scaling up and doing VMs and deploying their code. And it's a very AWS-like environment for them, and that's what they were concerned with, was ease of use, infrastructure as code, simplicity, and scalability. With Capital One, it was kind of a different story. They're obviously a very well-known financial institution. They would actually tell you they're a software company because they are pretty cutting edge with all of their technology and development. And they needed to update their existing infrastructure. They were doing it themselves. That's typically what a lot of folks do, is they build their own lab in their own environment. And they wanted to improve this to support their development teams and their growth because, again, their software innovation and their growth was just off the charts, and they were having a lot of trouble keeping up with it, managing it, controlling it. And then they also had the challenge of being the institution that they were, with extremely tight security policies. They carry a lot of important information and data and trust, and it was critical for them to have all the certifications like ISO 27001, SOC 1, and SOC 2. It's just a part of doing business. So with us, they were able to implement a private cloud. They had mixed Mac hardware. They even had non-Mac hardware that was managing some control planes. They used VMware. They used storage. But basically, they were able to create a very custom, very secure, very private cloud to handle all their needs and meet all their concerns. So for them, MacStadium's about security and scalability and those types of things. And then you come to somebody like Nubank, and it's more about performance and affordability. They just wanted to be able to scale things very quickly and get out of the business of, maintaining their old infrastructure. They had X serves on site, and they didn't necessarily need the latest and greatest Mac, but what they did have a trouble with was constantly dealing with the maintenance and hardware failure and struggles. So they came to MacStadium for a private cloud that was flexible and allowed them to automate their builds and allow them to automate their infrastructure. So again, kind of three different perspectives and three different use cases on MacStadium, but reasons why people would come. What we do, and I kind of alluded to this before, is provide all this infrastructure and this capability in a lot of different flavors. You folks here are probably dealing with fleets of laptops, potentially minis, pros, those types of things, possibly virtualization. And we try to service that need in all the different ways. You can literally go online and order a mini. It's instantly available. It's 2012, 2014, and 2018. And it lets you basically take control of this and do anything from deploy simple web server software to doing full Xcode development. You can use one or more of them. You can pick them up as you need them, and you get public IPs for everything. So it's truly a cloud-based, but it's a physical server in a rack that you control and own. And then if you need to get more sophisticated than that, we have enterprises that interact with VMware, but they want to do Apple builds or they need Apple concerns to be handled. So we can build dedicated vCenters that deploy across Mac Pros and Mac Minis and provide scalability with the VMware interface. And then the latest thing that we've been doing is actually taking it a step further into cloud environments like Azure and AWS and GCP with Orca, where we're creating scalable clouds that are actually Kubernetes based and live on Apple hardware. This is really helpful for development teams because it allows them to scale and flex containers with Docker and Kubernetes, but it can also be very, very helpful for teams that are using massive deployments or want to quickly and easily roll forward and roll back or use a lot of different image types. You can create and destroy test machines kind of at the click of a button within seconds. So it makes it very, very easy to spin up labs and combinations of networks and all the things like that. So Devops and Ci Cd on Mac, they tend to be really focused on non-Mac hardware in the regular world. And it makes it really easy on the dev teams to do things. It does not make it easy for the DevOps folks to handle. And Mac devs are pretty much kind of stuck in earlier days. They don't have access to clouds like everyone else do. But one of the key drivers there is that macOS requires Xcode and Apple hardware, which keeps Mac developers kind of in a sort of a desktop server mentality. They have to run Xcode. It has to run on Mac hardware. That has to be a true thing. And I'm sure as administrators, you're having to deal and service this stuff constantly. It's just the environment you have to maintain to let them do their job. Tools for this are emerging every day. They're getting a lot better. There's a lot of different build systems. There's a lot of CI as a service tools that do great things that are out there, but these things are still emerging, and there's a lot of control that's still lacking. Most CI setups, kind of force DevOps teams to concentrate on managing the infrastructure so much that they don't really get to focus on the agile practices and the infrastructure as code practices that they're really aiming at when they try to adopt these things. Again, with Orca, that was the purpose of stepping in that direction with MacStadium. We have bare metal, and you can orchestrate that in various ways. We have VMware, and you can use those tools to manage that. We thought if we focused on the problem specifically with our own software, we might be able to provide an additional layer of power and flexibility. So we created Orca, which stands for Orchestration with Kubernetes on Apple. And it's still genuine Apple hardware, and it's actually an Apple OS and container on that hardware. But what it does do is give you a quick, easy, scalable way with the power of Kubernetes to get some basic commands, software drive Mac and iOS deployments, and then integrate that to your Apple infrastructure. So again, you start to focus on the problem that you're solving, not the infrastructure management or the scalability. And just to kind of give you a quick overview of how that works, we actually build a virtualization layer on top of the Mac hardware, much like ESX. And then within that virtualization layer, it contains Kubernetes as a platform. And then within that Kubernetes platform, we create integrated controls to glue together containerized macOS that talks down to the hardware. So again, in the spirit of keeping things up and up with Apple, it's Apple OS on Apple hardware. There's just orchestration software in the middle to help it run faster, easier, better. When you're dealing with Apple at scale, whether it's, again, in the enterprise on the desktop or it's in the data center in the rack, you have a set of unique concerns. You have enterprise teams that are doing development, and they're likely often doing them in DIY setups. Enterprise development really demands enterprise configuration, and a lot of folks aren't doing it just because it's very challenging to do. Dev teams now especially expect flexibility, cloud-like resources to maximize efficiency, state management, MDM, all the kind of tooling that you need to make sure that when you're doing your job, the last thing you're caring about is the OS or the hardware or anything else. And companies, in addition to that, are going to demand processes and security around all of that. Again, tools like Jamf and things like that help maintain those states, but just addressing the infrastructure and the ability to deal with it comes with its own concerns. And so whether you're at MacStadium or you're doing this on your own, there's a couple of things you really, you kind of need to focus in on. You need to build for resilience and scalability. Having that one Mac under the desk or having 2 or 3 of them that have an MDM tool on them, but if somebody kicks the cable, we're in big trouble. That's not good enough. You need to really plan to build it like it should be built. You should probably virtualize or automate it. Again, tools, scripting tools, package management, those kinds of things for flexibility are going to be just mandatory. Securing the environment with networking is going to be very, very important. And you want to integrate to services that matter to your dev team. So making it easy for them to plug in the tools and manage those tools securely and easily is going to be a critical task. One thing at MacStadium, we're obviously all about Mac, but it's because we want to deliver the best experience to the Mac community possible. And we don't just do that because we like the community. We are the community. We run Mac internally. We live and breathe it. And we're not only talking to Jamf Nation today, but we're actually customers of Jamf. We use it. It runs our business. We're internally staffed with Mac laptops for our employees. Everybody has one in Mac Pro. And then we have minis and workstations of Mac Pros for our various tasks and development and operations. And so we heavily leverage the tools that Jamf provides in our fleet, and we get to see how these interact and work with our technologies as well. And that can be anything from DEP to package management, on-prem implementations where we're actually building out racks and trying to figure out how to automate and scale those, self-service applications across our own fleet for when we're managing our applications. We do a lot of open source patch management, and just general configuration and setup for onboarding and offboarding becomes a big thing. So if I were talking to you guys about something you could do as an administrator with MacStadium, even if you're not into build, you're probably into DevOps or you're probably into IT administration. There's lots of uses for a MacStadium cloud, and it can probably simply help you scale the lab environment and the infrastructure you have available to use. You can deploy a cloud with multiple OSs in multiple states and then run your tooling against it to see how that's going to respond without having to roll back and re-image or reset all your desktop devices that you're usually testing on. It's a really good place to refine patch policies for the various image states and versions of Mac OS or Mac hardware that you have out there. testing your JSS importer and monkey deployments over and over and over again to see how they respond and how you need to tweak them can be done a lot easier and a lot more scalably. You can obviously work through application package deployment and the complexities around getting that right for the new software that comes out. And then just validating and configuring your enrollment settings. You can basically start replicating all the various one-offs in your environment. And hopefully you don't have a ton of one-offs, but you can replicate those up and see how they behave destructively in a MacStadium cloud without any consequence. Then configuration and rollback, and then the myriad of tasks that you can do with sudo Jamf scripting, and you can just build sandboxes to your heart's content and kind of do things like that. Basically, it amounts to a very flexible, very scalable lab with all the flavors of hardware you want and all the flavors of OS you could need. So one way I would recommend, if you want to see how this works, is we do have this little hands-on demo. You won't be able to necessarily use your Jamf tooling in here, but you'll get the idea about how you could use MacStadium to create environments that you could put your tools in. One way is to go to this tryorca.com demo. It's a quick hands-on walkthrough. It shows you basically how to spin up a Mac cloud really fast and do some basic commands and get some infrastructure and get an OS into the desktop, see how you could work with it. The other thing I would encourage you to do is learn more at hands-on Jamf sessions. We are partnered with Jamf, and like I said, we use them every day, but we also support them in the labs that are being delivered for this conference right now. And if you want to get the experience there, that's a great place to start. We'd love for you to come by our booth, so visit us at our virtual booth this year, obviously virtual. Get started with MacStadium at www.macstadium.com. And you can go to tryorca.com to get a free demo, or you can contact us at hello@macstadium.com. I really appreciate the time today, and thanks for listening to the talk. And I hope you guys enjoy the conference.